The boardroom smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. 16 floors above downtown Naperville, in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the frozen DuPage River below, I watched Sandra's attorney shuffle a stack of papers he hadn't expected to shuffle that morning. It was 9:42 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. The overhead lights were the flat, merciless kind, the kind that make everyone look like they haven't slept. Sandra sat across the table in a navy blazer she bought 3 months ago, which I knew because I'd found the receipt in a joint account she'd forgotten I still had read access to. She looked composed. She'd been composed since the Friday she served me papers and since the Sunday she let him carry boxes through my front door. Her attorney, a man named Garrett Wills who wore his confidence like a second suit, set a labeled folder on the table in front of him and opened his mouth to begin the session. He didn't finish the sentence. The compliance officer from Merchants Midwest Bank cleared her throat. "Before we proceed," she said, "there are account irregularities we're required to disclose." Sandra's jaw didn't move, but her left hand, resting on the table in front of her, went very still. "Let me tell you how we got here. We've been married 19 years. We lived in a 4-bedroom colonial on Ashford Drive in Lisle, Illinois, 28 miles west of Chicago, in a neighborhood where the houses looked alike and the lawns competed quietly. I drove a 2016 Ford Explorer with 94,000 miles on it. I owned 2 pairs of dress shoes. I had never needed anyone to notice me to feel like I existed. My name is Neil Embry. I'm 52 years old. For 23 years, I've done forensic accounting, mostly fraud detection, financial litigation support, and expert witness work for civil cases. The kind of work that requires a specific type of patience. Not the patience of waiting, the patience of watching. You sit with numbers long enough to hear what they're not saying. You learn to treat every clean surface with a small amount of skepticism because clean surfaces, in my experience, are cleaned by someone for a reason. Sandra taught yoga for years, and then she started consulting for a wellness company called Revive Co. Supplement subscriptions, branded retreat packages, the kind of business that runs on social media energy and personal charm. She had both in surplus. That was always her gift. She could make you feel like the most interesting person she'd ever met. She deployed that gift carefully and often, and I'd spent years admiring it without ever examining exactly what it was in service of. Derek Castillo came into the picture through Revive Co. He was 38, owned a gym in Wheaton, had a black Silverado, and the kind of easiness that comes from never worrying about where money comes from. Sandra mentioned him the way you mention weather. Casually, in passing. Derek thinks the brand is a fitness company. Derek might speak at the fall retreat. By August, his name would simply stop coming up. I should have noticed the moment the name disappeared. Silence is an absence. It's just absence of trouble. There were 3 things I did. First, she changed the password on a joint Google account she used for finances in May, telling me it had been auto-reset. Second, in September, she handed me a notarized document with both hands, watching my face while she explained it was a legal instruction from both LLCs and teaching me. She asked me to mail it. I did. I didn't use it. Third, she started attending vendor events on weekday evenings. Different cities, inconsistent schedules, always home by midnight smelling of hotel portal air freshness and distance. I was tired of that feeling. Not the suspicious kind of tired, the carrying everything aside. The kind that comes from managing a mortgage two-car payment for tuition and starting home, or a youngest get a call, and a marriage that has grown quiet the way brown trees in November, gradually then completely. Until one morning, you step outside and realize the whole surface has changed overnight. There was a 4th thing I had dismissed, the one that I find hardest to say plainly now. Sandra had started referring to Revive Co. as my company in a kind of casual, repetitive way that rewrites small histories over time. The joint account that had originally seeded its operating costs, $40,000 we'd agreed on together, pulled from a savings account I built over a decade of careful work, had simply stopped being part of the conversation. I'd let that language shift happen without naming it. I told myself it was just pride in her work. I know what it actually was. I had spent 23 years watching the way language drifts. When someone is preparing to make a move they can't explain honestly, I knew the tells. I chose not to read them in my own house. That's the thing I sit with, not the betrayal itself, the choice to stop looking. I mistook the quiet for stability. The Friday she filed, I found out the way I found most things in that marriage. Not from her, but from a document. It arrived at 4:17 p.m., hand-delivered by a processed server in a tan overcoat while I was carrying groceries from the Explorer into the garage. He said my name once. I confirmed it. He handed me the envelope and walked back to his sedan without ceremony. I stood in the garage for 2 full minutes. The grocery bags sat on the concrete beside my feet. The automatic light clicked off because I hadn't moved. I didn't feel blindsided. I felt like something that had been blurry for a long time had finally been pulled into focus. Saturday, I stayed at my brother's place in Elmhurst. Sunday morning at 7044, I drove past the house on my way to get coffee and saw Derek Castillo's black Silverado sitting in my driveway. A moving dolly leaned against my front door. Someone had already propped it open with a box. I kept driving. I didn't feel rage. I felt recognition. I pulled into the parking lot of a Panera on Route 53, sat in the Explorer with the engine idling, and opened my laptop on the passenger seat. Not to write an email, not to call anyone. I navigated to the joint credit card portal, the one attached to the account she'd forgotten I still had read access to, and began scrolling backward through 12 months of transactions. The pattern wasn't subtle once you knew to look. I called Christine Vold, my attorney, from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. "Don't go back to the house yet," she said. "I wasn't going to. Save the credit card records. All of them. Don't delete a single email from any account you share." "Already saving," I said. There was a brief pause. "How long have you had a feeling something was off?" "Since May," I said. "I just didn't know its shape yet. I rented a furnished studio in Downers Grove, second floor, east-facing windows, a radiator that knocked every morning around 5. I didn't mind the knocking. I was usually already awake. By day 3, I had 4 years of joint account records printed and organized in labeled folders on the kitchen table. I cross-referenced them against our tax filings, against Revive Co.'s publicly registered business documents, and against the LLC formation papers I had absent-mindedly mailed in September. That LLC, Revive Holdings, LLC, registered in Illinois, listed Sandra Embry and Derek Castillo as co-owners. The notarized document I'd mailed had transferred my share of an investment property in DeKalb County, a rental we purchased in 2018, into that LLC's ownership. The notary who'd witnessed my signature was a woman in Wheaton named Gail Durbin. I held that page for a long time. Accountability doesn't announce itself. It just waits. I typed 3 sentences to Christine about what I'd found. Then I deleted all of them. What I needed wasn't urgency. It was silence. I needed them to keep moving forward while I kept moving backward through the paper trail they'd left. Christine met me at her office in Oak Brook on a Thursday. The waiting room carpet absorbed sound the way good waiting rooms do. She listened to what I'd found without interrupting, then sat back. "Don't signal," she said. "As long as they believe you're grieving, they're not watching what you're doing. They think I'm too passive to look closely," I said. She looked at me without expression. "Then be passive for a little while longer." The weeks between that Thursday and mid-January were among the quietest I've ever worked. I drove to the studio every evening after work, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and moved through records with the same deliberateness I brought to any litigation case. I pulled the tax returns from 2020 forward and went line by line. The Revive Co. consulting income Sandra had reported dropped significantly in 2021. The same year, the LLC was formed, despite the fact that her visible profile on the brand had grown considerably. That discrepancy alone was a 9-minute conversation I'd have with any client who sat across my desk. Income falling while activity rises means the income isn't disappearing, it's being redirected. I found 2 more transfers in October and November. Smaller amounts, $4,000 and $6,200 respectively, moving through a business checking account I hadn't known existed. Both transfers cited vendor retainer in the memo field. Both went to a routing number associated with Revive Holdings. The trail was not subtle. It had only ever relied on my not looking. There was one night, the second Saturday in December, around 11, when I almost wrecked all of it. Sandra called my cell. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered because not answering would have looked like anger, and anger would have looked like suspicion, and I needed to look like nothing at all. She wanted to discuss the children's holiday plans. Her voice was warm and measured in the way it gets when she's managing a situation from above it. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the Revive Holdings LLC registration open on my laptop, and I could see, in the same browser window, the timestamp on a wire transfer and her name in the signatory field. She asked me how I was holding up. I came within about 3 words of telling her what I knew. I could feel the sentence forming. the one that would have handed her a timeline of my investigation, given her 2 weeks to move assets, and stripped me of every advantage I'd spent December building. My throat tightened. The words sat at the base of it like a held breath. Getting through it, I said. She said she was glad I was okay. I said the same. We hung up. I sat there for 2 minutes doing nothing, understanding that I had just walked a very narrow line across a very cold floor. After that, I let her calls go to voicemail. I found the second layer myself, the way I find most things, by following a number that doesn't add up. The DeKalb Rentals property record showed a cash-out refinance in July, a transaction I hadn't signed for, hadn't been notified of, and hadn't seen a dollar of. The deed referenced a power of attorney Sandra claimed I granted in April 2019. Christine requested the document from the county clerk's office. When it arrived, I studied the signature for 4 minutes. It looked like mine. The notarization date was April 12, 2019. I pulled my travel records. April 9th through April 22, 2019, Fort Lauderdale, a federal litigation case. Hotel confirmation, flight record, client correspondence, timestamped work product. 1,400 miles away, when someone signed my name in front of a notary in Wheaton, I printed the power of attorney and set it next to the property filing and the LLC registration. 3 documents, 1 signature that couldn't have been mine. The shape of the thing was becoming clear. On January 14th, an email arrived from a disposable address. No name, subject line, "You should see this before they finalize anything." It contained a screenshot of a wire transfer, $43,000 moved from a joint investment account I hadn't known still existed into a Revive Holdings account the same week I'd mailed the LLC document. The sender was Gail Durbin, the notary. I already knew what I needed. What she gave me was corroboration and 1 account number I hadn't been able to trace on my own. I verified it. It was real. I forwarded it to Christine. "This account needs to be in front of Merchants Midwest compliance before we walk into that room." I stopped looking for explanations. I started building a timeline. The cash-out refinance had extracted $87,000 in equity. The wire transfer Gail had flagged added $43,000. A Revive Co. expense account I'd now traced through 2 shell entries added another $8,400. Total misdirected marital assets over 14 months, $138,400. This wasn't impulsive. This was architecture. The affair was the scaffolding. My presumed passivity was the foundation. Every piece of it had been constructed while I was looking at the surface and trusting it to hold. Christine sat with the folder I brought her on a Tuesday morning, the sky outside her window the color of old pewter. She read for 11 minutes without speaking. "This is forgery," she said. "Not ambiguous. Actual forgery? Yes. We flagged this to Merchants Midwest compliance before the dissolution hearing. If the account is tied to the LLC, they're required to be present." "They already have the flag," I said. "They just don't have the full picture yet." She looked up. "They will by Friday." "Why?" The dissolution conference had been scheduled as a routine preliminary. Sandra's attorney had framed it around the DeKalb property, which he believed was the only asset still genuinely in dispute. He was working from what Sandra had told him. Sandra had not told him everything. She arrived at 9,035 in the navy blazer and low heels. "No, Derek!" Her attorney had coached her on optics. She looked at me once as she sat down, the look a person gives when they've already written the outcome and just need the paperwork to confirm it. Garrett Wills opened by describing the meeting as an expedited asset mediation. His folder was labeled. His posture was certain. He had the smooth delivery of a man who'd navigated hundreds of these rooms and expected this one to be no different. Christine set her folder on the table beside mine. At 9:42, Patricia Howe from Merchants Midwest Bank Compliance walked in. Neither attorney had invited her. She had petitioned the court for disclosure rights 6 days earlier, citing a mandatory obligation to present findings tied to an active legal proceeding involving flagged accounts. Garrett looked at her and that wasn't important. "Before we proceed," Patricia said, "there are account irregularities we're required to disclose." There's 3 documents on the table. The wire transfer confirmation, the refinance property, filing, the power of attorney, the invitation for the forensic document examiner. Christine had received, indicating that the 2019 signature had been produced with different ink chemistry than the notary stamp, consistent with the document assembled with 2 separate signatures at 2 separate points. The room didn't go loud. It went the other direction entirely. Garrett picked up the power of attorney document. tapped it twice on his folder. Stopped! I had watched enough deposition witnesses to know what a man looks like when he realizes his briefing was incomplete. He turned to Sandra. She was looking at the window. Sandra's composure didn't break. It receded, the way water pulls back from a shoreline before something larger arrives. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The hand on the table pressed flat, fingers spreading slightly as though she needed to confirm the surface was still solid beneath her. Derek Castillo's attorney, who had not planned to be part of this meeting, cleared his throat. He was not there to defend Derek. He was there to create legal distance between Derek and Sandra's liability before the exposure became formal record. My client operated in good faith on representations made by, he began. That is not accurate, Sandra said. Her voice was steady but thin at the edges, like ice that sounds right until it doesn't. I have text message records indicating otherwise, Derek's attorney said. Something happened then that I hadn't fully anticipated. Sandra looked at Derek's attorney with an expression I recognized, the same calculation she used when a room was shifting, and she was determining how quickly she could reframe it. Then she looked at Garrett. Garrett was studying the table. Then she looked at me. The room was very quiet. The HVAC system in the hallway cycled on and sent a faint vibration through the walls. Someone's pen clicked once and stopped. This is a misunderstanding, she said. To Patricia, to Christine, to the room. No one answered her. I had not spoken a single word. Below the window, the DuPage River lay frozen and gray-white in the February light. A fracture had opened along its center where the current ran fastest. You could see dark water moving through it, steady and unhurried. The formal findings came out across the following 6 weeks. The forged power of attorney was referred to the DuPage County State's Attorney's Office. Gail Durbin provided a sworn affidavit she had not witnessed my signature. She'd been handed a pre-assembled document, told it was a correction of an earlier filing, and she had been frightened and ashamed of her role. Her statement was quiet and specific. I believed her completely. The $138,400 was ordered returned to the marital estate as part of the dissolution, with interest. The DeKalb rental was restored to joint ownership and sold at court order, proceeds divided. Revive Holdings was dissolved by the state following a compliance review. Derek Castillo's gym absorbed legal fees it hadn't budgeted for and was listed for sale by March. Sandra's attorney negotiated a no-contest resolution on the forgery charge. Full restitution, 3 years of supervised probation. She kept her leased Audi. She lost the Lyle house. It went to market in April. I drove past it once, not deliberately, on my way back from a weekend in Wisconsin. A realtor's sign stood in the front yard. The flower beds had dried out. The front door was the deep teal color she'd chosen 2 years ago, with great conviction. It looked smaller than I remembered. My son, 24 and living in Chicago, called me the evening the dissolution was finalized. We talked for 6 minutes. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine. He said, okay. That was most of it. There are things that settle between fathers and sons during events like this. Not anger, not sides taken, just the weight of facts that can't be walked back. We'd find our footing. We were already trying. My daughter sent a text from her apartment near DePaul. I'm sorry it happened this way, but I'm not sorry you found out. I read it 3 times. I met Sandra once more. A parking lot exchange at a Jewel, Osco on Ogden Avenue on a gray March afternoon, slushy at the curb, the kind of day that can't decide if winter is done with it. She looked tired in a way that wasn't cosmetic, not ruined, just reduced to her actual size without the room's attention to amplify her. She handed me a cardboard box with some books, a framed photo of the kids from 2016, and a small clay pot my youngest had made in middle school that Sandra had always kept on the kitchen windowsill. I don't know why she'd kept it this long. I don't know why she'd thought to return it now. I didn't plan for it to go this far, she said. I thought about the document she'd handed me in September with both hands, watching my face for any sign I might stop and read it. But I also thought about something I'd noticed 19 years of being married to her, the way she ran hot at the edges of her patience when she felt invisible. She hadn't been wrong that she was invisible in our marriage toward the end. I'd been tired and absent in ways I couldn't fully account for. That didn't build a legal defense for anything she'd done, but I understood the underlying need, the one that gets dressed up in greed when no one names it as loneliness first. You planned further than you're admitting, I said. That's the part that actually matters. She looked away, not defiantly, just at something else, something I couldn't see. I put the box in the back of the Explorer and drove back to the apartment in Downers Grove. The clay pot sat on the passenger seat. I'd forgotten it was there until I parked, and I sat for a moment looking at it. lopsided, painted orange and green by an 11-year-old who'd been proud of it before carrying it upstairs. That night, I made a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and created a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it Closed. I moved every document, screenshot, and file from the previous 4 months into it. Then I shut the laptop, sat back, and listened to the radiator knock in the quiet, and the coffee cooled in the mug, and the room was simply a room. I thought a lot about what that year was at its core. It wasn't a betrayal story. It was a story about what happens when someone mistakes your patience for vacancy, when they decide that because you don't occupy the center of a room, you must not understand what's happening in it. The ice that forms on a river in winter looks permanent. It looks like the truth of the place. But underneath, the current hasn't stopped. It's been moving the whole time, working at the underside, and when it cracks from the center first, where the water is fastest and the pressure's been building longest. That's not a lesson I invented. That's just how rivers work. A few weeks after the dissolution was finalized, I drove out to the decal property one last time before the court-ordered sale closed. I hadn't been there in almost a year. The tenant had moved out in January. I stood in the empty driveway for a few minutes in the cold, looking at a house I'd bought as an investment that had been refinanced without my knowledge. That was now being sold to satisfy a judgment I'd built one document at a time. A cardinal landed on the fence post at the edge of the yard and sat there. I don't know why that registered. It just did. Then I got back in the Explorer and drove home. The strongest move I made in all of it wasn't building the case. It was staying quiet long enough that they forgot I was capable of one. If you've ever been the one who pays the bills and holds the systems together and never announces it, and someone decided your silence meant you weren't watching, I want you to know that being underestimated is only dangerous if you start to believe it yourself. We share stories like this every week on the Payback Files. If this one found you at the right time, stay. There are more. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, send it to them without explanation. Let's keep walking this road.